is CNN Breaking News.
Loud bangs have been heard outside of Britain's Parliament. A witness told Reuters that armed police were seen running to an exit there. Separately, a parliamentary official told the news agency 2 people have been shot outside and the UK Parliament building is in lockdown as we speak. Let's get you straight to London and CNN's Max Foster. Max, what are authorities telling us at this point?
Very little at the moment, Becky. We have to rely in these situations, as you know, on official confirmation. The police lead with this, and what we've got from the police is they're aware of an incident in Parliament, and they're saying we were called at approximately 2:40 p.m. local time, so that was about 15 minutes ago, to reports of an incident at Westminster Bridge. So that's the bridge right by Parliament. You can just about make it out there. So there's Parliament. The bridge is right ahead of us, stretching away beyond those buses. So the incident is around there. It's being treated as a firearms incident, which does sort of back up all the media reports, and multiple media reports, Becky, that there was some sort of shots heard or fired in that area. The police literally haven't been able to get there, but as you know, within Parliament there's lots of police, and they've got their own police as well, so there's not going to be any shortage of security down there.
Max, I'm just looking at the video that we are showing here, the images that we are showing out of London as you speak. And we're sitting on a shot here of Westminster Bridge. You see the eye. People who know London, who will have visited London, will recognise the eye to the right-hand side of the screen. That is Westminster Bridge, which leads away, of course, as you rightly pointed out, from the Palace of Westminster, as it is known, which houses the House of Commons, of course, and the House of Lords. You've suggested that very little from authorities as of yet, but we do know that we are beginning to see reports of possible injuries on that bridge. Anything more that you can tell us on those at this point?
I'm just very apprehensive at the moment, just relying on the fact that they're talking about a firearms incident and just knowing the history of how they treat these incidents. There are lots of other reports about something else that might have happened there on the bridge, but we're not going to bring you that until we've got it confirmed. I can say that pretty authoritative sources that I know are, you know, in terms of the reporting community down there in Parliament, are suggesting that this is quite serious indeed, and injuries involved as well. But the police, I was at a briefing relatively recently, and when they've got a serious incident, they are actually pointing us all towards Twitter at the moment and their feed on there, because they're going to be so sort of engulfed with information. So that's what we're keeping an eye on at the moment, and then obviously we're making our calls.
2:57 p.m. in the afternoon in London, and let me just get you exactly what we know to date. Loud bangs have been heard outside of Britain's Parliament. A witness told Reuters that armed police were seen running to an exit. Separately, a parliamentary official telling the news agency 2 people have been shot outside and the UK Parliament building is in lockdown. You are looking at live pictures of the scene. That is Parliament Square to the left-hand side, the Palace of Westminster to the right. That is Whitehall that you are looking at to the north of your picture, where clearly the traffic has been suspended. To the right of the picture and disguised by the Palace of Westminster, there is the road leading to Westminster Bridge. So as things stand, an incident reported at or outside the House of Commons or British Parliament. Loud bangs have been heard outside of the building. A witness telling Reuters that armed police were seen running to an exit. And again, separately, a parliamentary official told the news agency 2 people have been shot outside and the UK Parliament building is in lockdown. Westminster Tube, I'm now being told, is also in lockdown. That is being reported by the Reuters news agency, and the Tube just to the right of your screen behind the building. Let me get you to my colleagues in the US who will continue this coverage for you. Wolf Blitzer, handing over to him.
Shots have been fired. What do we know, Max?
Well, we know very little at this point. We've just had this lockdown of the area, and we basically heard the story, Wolf, from our colleagues at the parliamentary press there in the Houses of Parliament. You can see it just to the right of the shot there. There's been some sort of incident on Westminster Bridge, which stretches from the Houses of Parliament over the bridge south to London. There's been some sort of firearms incident. We're having to rely here on information from the official sources. I've recently been in briefings in terms of serious incidents happening in London, and they want us to rely on the sources coming to us from the police, and all they're telling us at the moment is there's been some sort of firearms incident. Having said that, very reliable sources in the political reporting press based, just yards from the scene that you're looking at now are saying there is a serious incident unfolding. The area has been completely cleared, and from what you can see and from what I can see, Wolf, the area is in lockdown. So this is a very serious incident just by looking at the reaction that there's been there.
It's pretty extraordinary in London to have an incident like this, although there have been warnings. We have no idea what the cause of this is. There have been warnings, Max, in recent days of potential terror plots. Is that right?
Well, there's ongoing concern about terror plots, of course, and the most recent attachment of that has been this electronics ban on flights into the UK from certain areas of the world, in the Middle East in particular, North Africa, and I know the US has done the same sort of thing as well. But there's been some sort of intelligence, we don't know whether it's US intelligence or whether it's British intelligence, which has suggested some sort of threat. Not an imminent threat, but they're concerned about something. So there has been this heightened sense of alert in London, in the UK anyway. And when it comes to this, well, my most recent briefing with the anti-terror police in London is their eyes are very much on those landmark targets in the United Kingdom. And of course, Parliament, Buckingham Palace, just down the road, they're the sort of buildings we're talking about. So certainly Parliament is seen as a target, so any sort of incident happening there will be treated very seriously indeed. We can't talk about what level of concern here at the moment, apart from they've locked down the area, because it could be a lone incident of some sort. Even because they're so sensitive right now, a car crashing into the railings around Parliament, that would cause a big reaction. But I can tell you that I'm hearing some quite serious reports of scenes coming to me from the political reporters down there.
Well, how unusual is it, a full lockdown of Parliament and the entire area around Parliament in London? To me, that sounds pretty extraordinary.
It is unusual, but in this heightened sense of alert, this is how they're going to react. That's been heightened. When I say it hasn't officially been heightened, but I know that they are looking at sort of potential targets around London more closely than they have been in years gone by. So any sort of incidents around there would have this sort of reaction. We just haven't had any sort of incident on whatever level recently. So what we can say is just it's been cleared, and the police are doing what they can, and if they weren't that concerned, they would have cleared it by now, because obviously we're heading into rush hour as well. That's the other concern about incidents. So we've got a photo here from James West. Yeah,
we're looking at a picture, Max, of a car that looks like it crashed into the fence around Parliament right there. I don't know if you have any more information. Was this an accident or was this deliberate? What can you tell us?
Well, if it was an accident, I suggest the area wouldn't have been locked down, but I just don't know at this point, Wolf. It looks like a car's gone into the railings. What we need to know is what happened ahead of that. So what was that car doing before it went into those railings, and who was affected as a result? We also, if we tie that image with what we know from the Metropolitan Police, that there's been a firearms incident. There are two serious incidents in a small space of London, which is next to a landmark building. So this is very concerning indeed.
We're getting word from Reuters in London, Max, that there are people who have been injured, at least a dozen people injured near the Parliament, according to a Reuters photographer who's on the scene. Let me read from Reuters. At least a dozen people have been injured on Westminster Bridge after large bangs were heard outside the British Parliament. That, according to a Reuters photographer who is on the scene. And you're getting more information as well. But if at least a dozen people have been injured, that would represent clearly a very significant and ominous development.
It is, and a lot of what we're getting is from Reuters because of that photographer. We're also hearing from Reuters that an alleged assailant was shot by UK Parliament, at the UK Parliament, by armed police as well. So that's a Reuters source story, but obviously very reliable on their stories coming out of London. Also, Andrew Neil, who's a very prominent parliamentary journalist, is also reporting that the Prime Minister has been evacuated as well, because you can assume that either she was in Parliament or in Downing Street, but she's been moved out of the area. So it's getting increasingly serious. the reaction is certainly serious. So we can only wait to hear what the police know and report it. But I don't think we're going to hear a huge amount, I have to say, Wolf, because there's going to be an information lockdown around this if it's an ongoing incident as well. The UK authorities, I know, have been very clear that they're going to give as little information as they can in these sorts of incidents. And if the Prime Minister is being moved, we're looking at something pretty serious.
And as far as you know, the lockdown clearly is still in effect, right, Max?
Well, it's just based on the live images that we've got coming in. And if you look at it, they've stopped all the buses on the bridge and got everyone out of the way. All I can see is emergency services. So a sense of urgency down there for sure, and they haven't cleared it yet. And now that that photo has come in, there's, the investigation is going to be why that car was in the railings. Was it deliberately aimed at the railings, or was that linked to the firearms incident?
Was Parliament in session at the time? You say the Prime Minister is being evacuated, but was Parliament in session?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I'm going to have to check my notes, but I don't know whether the Prime Minister was in Parliament. It's in session, yes, and it's just, getting going at this time of the day as well. When we say she's been evacuated, that's sourced to Andrew Neil. I don't know whether that's from Parliament or from Downing Street. Downing Street's not very far from there at all. But if they've brought in anti-terror police, I can't confirm that they have. One of the automatic things they would have done is asked where the Prime Minister is. If they feel she's under threat, they would have moved her.
Stand by for a moment, because I know you're going to be collecting some more information, Max. Bob Baer is with us, former CIA counterterror analyst. Bob, in a situation like this, a car crashes into that rail, that fence outside of Parliament. Shots clearly have been heard by eyewitnesses. Is it out of an abundance of caution that there's a complete lockdown, that the Prime Minister is evacuated, or does it sound a lot more ominous?
Right now, Wolf, we're going to have to wait for the details. We don't know who did the shooting. It could have been the police. It could have been the attackers. And it's standard for the Prime Minister to be moved, and it's standard to close down that entire area around Parliament, simply to make sure that the attackers don't get away. And the way you do it is close it down. It doesn't mean that there's a larger attack. It's just that in the confusion, it's so easy to get away unless you close all the streets. And you have to remember, with Parliament, it's pretty much an indefensible target. There's so many tourists around there, so many people. You can do a lot of damage very quickly with something as simply as a truck, sort of like the Nice attacks.
The UK police are investigating what they're calling this firearms incident right near the British Parliament in London. Bob, London's Metropolitan Police say they were called in of reports of this incident near Westminster Bridge, right near Parliament. It's being treated as what they call a firearms incident. When you hear a firearms incident, clearly people have some firearms, and we assume that they've been fired.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like that. Right now, it sounds like this was an attack with guns. And Wolf, we got to remember that in Britain, they're very tightly controlled. It's not just somebody who's lost their mind, a psychopath. Yeah, I would say right now, and I could be wrong, it was an organized, well-organized, well-planned terrorist attack. First reports are always corrected later on, but that's the way it sounds to me.
Henry Mance is joining us on the phone right now. Henry, I understand you were inside Parliament and you've been given instructions. Tell us what you've seen and what you've heard.
Yeah, this was a fairly quiet Wednesday afternoon, and you had members of Parliament going down to vote, actually, in a parliamentary vote. And then all of a sudden, there was some kind of commotion outside, and the members of Parliament started being sent back the other way. They were told to get down at one point, and then away from the windows, away from the glass entrance to the building. And what I'm now told by colleagues, although I can't see it myself, is that there is a person down and injured, just where the MPs would have been walking past. So this was not far away from where senior people were.
And have you been told that you have to be in lockdown, you and your colleagues and associates inside Parliament? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So you have an area of the building where the journalists work. They're locked up there. We've been. I'm in a newer part of the building, and everyone here, which includes the people from from kind of academics to students who are just visiting the building to sort of advisors and officials have been herded into to meeting rooms really to get away from the glass and some feeling that people could still be at risk within the building.
Our Max Foster, I want to go back quickly to you. I understand you're getting more information. What are you learning?
Well, we're relying a lot on Reuters on this. They had a photographer right there at the scene. I don't want to sort of draw too many conclusions here, but I'm going to give you what facts are coming through from them. So what we have is a report of 2 people on the ground on the bridge bleeding heavily. We've got a report, an official report from the police saying there was a firearms incident. We've got a vehicle that's gone into the railings there at Parliament, just off the bridge. We then hear from Reuters that at least a dozen armed officers have gone inside the British Parliament. And now we've heard from the leader of the House of Commons that a policeman has been stabbed within Parliament. So it seems as though there's been a breach. And I don't want to link these incidents, but it does suggest that that's the pattern of events. People lying on the bridge, the car going into the railings, and a policeman being stabbed inside. And we do know that the Prime Minister now was in Parliament when all of this happened, and she was evacuated.
And when they say she was evacuated, do you know where they evacuate her, to an undisclosed location?
Well, it just depends on the level of the threat, whether they feel it's got, they've contained it. Obviously, all of her security is set up in Downing Street. So if they feel that the perimeter of the threat is very small, just around Parliament, I suspect that she would have gone to Downing Street. But, you know, I don't know what their conditions are in these.
Because other reporters, and I'm looking at some of their reports, Christopher Hope, a political journalist for the Daily Telegraph, says he heard shots fired outside of Parliament. He also heard a loud explosion. Then he heard more shooting. He says man lying shot outside gates to Parliament, gunshots outside. And he calls this, and he's there on the scene, frightening. That's just one journalist who happened to have been at Parliament on this day. We're getting more reports along those lines. But stand by for a moment. Phil Black is also getting some information.